Hello and welcome to Storytime with Mama Bear. I'm going to try to get as much into this video as I can just because it's really late at night and I had some stuff that I needed to get done, but it is done now. And so yeah, let's see how far into this we could get done. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, but like I said, it's really late at night. I'm tired, but I do want to get some more bread. Chapter 3. I am very, very sorry to leave you hanging like that. But as I was writing the tale of the Baudelaire orphans, I happened to look at the clock and realized I was running late for a formal dinner party given by a friend of mine, Madame de Lustro. Madame de Lustro is a good friend, an excellent detective, and a fine cook, but she flies into a rage if you arrive even 5 minutes later than her invitation states. So you understand that I had to dash off. You must have thought at the end of the previous chapter that Sunny was dead, and that this terrible thing that happened to the Baudelaires at Uncle Monty's house, but I promise you, Sunny survives this particular episode. It is Uncle Monty, unfortunately, who will be dead, but not yet. As the fangs of the incredibly deadly viper... Can you see that? I don't know if you can see that. Let me try to zoom in a little bit. As the fangs of the incredibly deadly viper closed on Sunny's chin, Violet and Klaus watched in horror as Sunny's little eyes closed and her face grew quiet. Then, moving as suddenly as the snake, Sunny smiled brightly, opened her mouth, and bit the incredibly deadly viper right in its tiny, scaled nose. The snake let go of her chin, and Violet and Klaus could see that it had left barely a mark. The two older Baudelaire siblings looked at Uncle Monty, and Uncle Monty looked back at them and laughed. His laughter bounced off the glass walls of the reptile room. "Uncle Monty, what can we do?" Klaus said in despair. "Oh, I'm sorry, my dears," Uncle Monty said, wiping his eyes with his hands. "You must be very frightened, but the incredibly deadly viper is one of the least dangerous and most friendly creatures in the animal kingdom. Sunny has nothing to worry about, and neither do you." Klaus looked at his baby sister, who was still in his arms, as she playfully gave the incredibly deadly viper a big hug around its thick body. And he realized Uncle Monty must be telling the truth. But then why is it called the incredibly deadly viper? Uncle Monty laughed again. "It's a misnomer," he said, using a word which here means a very wrong name. "Because I discovered it, I got to name it, remember? But don't tell anyone about the incredibly deadly viper, because I'm going to present it to the Herpetological Society and give them a good scare before explaining that the snake is completely harmless. Lord knows they've teased me many times because of my name. 'Hello, hello, Montgomery, Montgomery,' they say. How are you, Montgomery, Montgomery. But at this year's conference, I'm going to get back at them with this prank." Uncle Monty drew himself up to his full height and began talking in a silly scientific voice. "Colleagues, I'll say, I would like to introduce you to a new species, the incredibly deadly viper, which I found in the southwest forest of—" "Oh my God! It's escaped!" And then when all my fellow herpetologists have jumped up in their chairs and tables, are shrieking in fear, I'll tell them that the snake wouldn't hurt a fly. Wouldn't that be hysterical?" Violet and Klaus looked at each other and then began laughing, half in relief that their sister was unharmed, and half with amusement because they thought Uncle Monty's prank was a good one. Klaus put Sunny down on the floor, and the incredibly deadly viper followed, wriggling its tail affectionately around Sunny, the way you might put your arm around someone of whom you were fond. "Are there any snakes in this room that are dangerous?" Violet asked. "Of course," Uncle Monty said. "You can't study snakes for 40 years without encountering some dangerous ones. I have a whole cabinet of venom samples from every poisonous snake known to people. So I study the ways in which these dangerous snakes work. There is a snake in this room whose venom is so deadly that your heart would stop before you even knew he'd bitten you. There is a snake who can open her mouth so wide she could swallow all of us together in one gulp. There is a pair of snakes who have learned to drive a car so recklessly that they would run you over in the street and never stop to apologize. But all of these snakes are in cages with much sturdier locks. All of them can be handled safely when one has studied them enough, and I promise, if you take time to learn the facts, no harm will come to you here in the reptile room. There is a type of situation which occurs all too often, and which is occurring at this point in the story of the Boodler orphans, called dramatic irony. Simply put, dramatic irony is when a person makes a harmless remark and someone else who hears it knows something that makes the remark have a different and usually unpleasant meaning. For instance, if you were in a restaurant and said out loud, "I can't wait to eat the veal marsala I ordered," and there were people around who knew that the veal marsala was poisoned and that you would die as soon as you took a bite, your situation would be one of dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is a cruel occurrence, one that is almost always upsetting, and I'm sorry to have it appear in this story, but Violet, Klaus, and Sunny have such unfortunate lives that it was only a matter of time before dramatic irony. Sorry about that. I'm guessing y'all can hear my cat. She has the zoomies. Violet, Klaus, and Sunny have such unfortunate lives that it is only a matter of time before dramatic irony would rear its ugly head. As you and I listen to Uncle Monty tell the three Boodler orphans that no harm will ever come to them in the reptile room, we should be experiencing the strange feeling that accompanies the arrival of dramatic irony. This feeling is not unlike the sinking in one's stomach when one is in an elevator that suddenly goes down, or when you are snug in bed and your closet door suddenly creaks open to reveal the person who has been hiding there. For no matter how safe and happy the three children felt, no matter how comforting Uncle Monty's words were, you and I know that Uncle Monty will be dead and the Boodlers will be miserable once again. During the week that followed, however, the Boodlers had a wonderful time in their new home. Each morning they woke up and dressed in the privacy of their very own rooms, which they had chosen and decorated to their liking. Violet had chosen a room that had an enormous window looking out onto the snake-shaped hedges on the front lawn. She thought such a view might inspire her when she was inventing things. Uncle Monty had allowed her to tack up large pieces of white paper on each wall so she could sketch out her ideas, even if they came to her in the middle of the night. Klaus had chosen a room with a cozy alcove in it. The word alcove here means a very, very small nook, just perfect for sitting and reading. With Uncle Monty's permission, he had carried up a large cushioned chair from the living room and placed it right in the alcove under a heavy brass reading lamp. Each night, rather than reading in bed, he would curl himself in the chair with a book from Uncle Monty's library, sometimes until morning. Sunny had chosen a room right between Violet's and Klaus's and filled it with small, hard objects from all over the house, so she could bite them when she felt like it. There were also assorted toys from the incredibly deadly viper. There was also assorted toys for the incredibly deadly viper, so the two of them could play together whenever they wanted, within reason. But where the Boodlers most liked to be was the reptile room. Each morning after breakfast, they would join Uncle Monty, who would have already started work on the upcoming expedition. Violet sat at the table with the ropes, gears, and cages that made up the different snake traps, learning how they worked, repairing them if they were broken, and occasionally making improvements to make the traps more comfortable for the snakes on their long journey from Peru to Uncle Monty's house. Klaus sat nearby, reading the books on Peru. Uncle Monty had and taking notes on a pad of paper so they could refer to them later. And Sonny sat on the floor, biting a long rope. Oh my goodness. I am so sorry for the yawn, you guys. Peru, Uncle Monty had and taking notes on a pad of paper so they could refer to them later. And Sonny sat on the floor, biting a long rope into shorter pieces with great enthusiasm. But what the Baudelaire youngsters liked best was learning all about the reptiles from Uncle Monty. As they worked, he would show them the Alaskan cow lizard, a long green creature that produced delicious milk. They met the dissonant toad, which could imitate human speech in a gravelly voice. Uncle Monty taught them how to handle the inky newt without getting its black dye all over your fingers, and how to tell when the irascible python was grumpy and best left alone. He taught them not to give the green gimlet toad too much water, and to never, under any circumstances, let the Virginia wolf snake near a typewriter. While he was telling them about the different reptiles, Uncle Monty would often siege a word which here means let the conversation veer off. The stories from his travels describing the men, snakes, women, toads, children, and lizards he met on his journeys. And before too long, the Baudelaire orphans were telling Uncle Monty all about their own lives, eventually talking about their parents and how much they missed them. Uncle Monty was interested in the Baudelaire stories, was as interested in the Baudelaire stories as they were in his. And sometimes they got to talking so long they scarcely had time to gobble down dinner before cramming themselves into Uncle Monty's tiny Jeep and heading to the movies. One morning, however, when the three children finished their breakfast and went into the reptile room, they found not Uncle Monty, but a note from him. The note read as follows: Dear Bambini, I have gone into town to buy a few last things we need for the expedition: Peruvian wasp repellent, toothbrushes, canned peaches, and a fireproof canoe. It will take a while to find the peaches, so don't expect me back until dinner time. Stefano Gustav's replacement will arrive by taxi. Please make him feel welcome. As you know, it is only 2 days until the expedition, so please work very hard today. Your giddy Uncle Monty. What does giddy mean? Violet asked. When they had finished reading the note. Dizzy and excited, Klaus said, having learned the word from a collection of poetry he had read in the first grade. I guess he means excited about Peru, or maybe he's excited about having a new assistant. Or maybe he's excited about us, Violet said. Kindle! Sonny shrieked, which probably meant, or maybe he's excited about all these things. I'm a little giddy myself, Klaus said. It's really fun to live with Uncle Monty. It certainly is, Violet agreed. After the fire, I thought I would never be happy again, but our time here has been wonderful. I still miss our parents, though, Klaus said. No matter how nice Uncle Monty is, I wish we still lived in our real home. Of course, Violet said quickly. She paused and slowly said out loud something she had been thinking about for the past few days. I think we'll always miss our parents, but I think we can miss them without being miserable all the time. After all, they wouldn't want us to be miserable. Remember that time, Klaus said wistfully, when we were bored one rainy afternoon and all of us painted our toenails bright red? Yes, Violet said, grinning, and I spilled some on the yellow chair. Arco! Sonny said quietly, which probably meant something like, and the stain never really came out. The Baudelaire orphans smiled at each other and without a word began to do the day's work. For the rest of the morning, they worked quietly and steadily, realizing that their contentment here at Monty's house did not erase their parents' death, not at all. But at least it made them feel better after feeling so sad for so long. And it is unfortunate, of course, that this quiet, happy moment was the last one the children would have for quite some time. But there is nothing anyone can do about it now. Just when the Boodlers were beginning to think about lunch, they heard a car pull up in front of the house and toot its horn. To the children, it signaled the arrival of Stefano. To us, it should signal the beginning of more misery. I expect that's the new assistant, Klaus said, looking up from the big Peruvian book of small Peruvian snakes. I hope he's as nice as Monty. Me too, Violet said, opening and shutting a toad trap to make sure it worked smoothly. It would be unpleasant to travel to Peru with somebody who is boring or mean. Gurja! Sunny shrieked, which probably meant something like, well, let's go find out what Stefano is like. The Boodlers left the reptile room and walked out the front door to find a taxi parked next to the snake-shaped hedges. A very tall, thin man with a long beard and no eyebrows over his eyes was getting out of the back seat, carrying a black suitcase with a shiny silver padlock. I'm not going to give you a tip, the bearded man was saying to the driver of the taxi, because you talk too much. Not everybody wants to hear about your new baby, you know. Oh, hello there. I am Stefano, Dr. Montgomery's new assistant. How do you do? How do you do? Violet said, and as she approached him, there was something about his wheezy voice that seemed vaguely familiar. How do you do? Klaus said, and as he looked up at Stefano, there was something about his shiny eyes that seemed quite familiar. Huda! Sunny shrieked. Stefano wasn't wearing any socks, and Sunny, crawling on the ground, could see his bare ankle between his pant cuff and his shoe. There on his ankle was something that was most familiar of all. The Boodler orphans all realized the same thing at the same time and took a step back as you might from a growling dog. This man wasn't Stefano, no matter what he called himself. The three children looked at Uncle Monty's new assistant from head to toe and saw that he was none other than Count Olaf. He may have shaved off his one long eyebrow and grown a beard over his scraggly chin, but there was no way he could hide the tattoo of an eye on his ankle. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to get through chapter 4 this evening. I might get to it tomorrow and then just kind of put the two chapters together. So that's going to be everything for tonight. We are continuing to read from book number 2 of a series of unfortunate events. I believe the other day I only read one chapter just because it was really late at night and I was really tired. Well, we're at the point yet again to where it is really late at night, but I wanted to get some more reading in, and I'm probably just going to attach this reading to the last one to make the video a little bit longer. Chapter 4. One of the most difficult things to think about in life is one's regrets. Something will happen to you, and you will do the wrong thing, and for years afterward, you will wish you had done something different. For instance, sometimes when I am walking along the seashore or visiting the grave of a friend, I will remember a day a long time ago when I didn't bring a flashlight with me to a place where I should have brought a flashlight, and the results were disastrous. Why didn't I bring a flashlight? I think to myself, even though it is too late to do anything about it. I should have brought a flashlight. For years after this moment, in the lives of the Boodler orphans, Klaus thought of the time when he and his siblings realized that Stefano was actually Count Olaf, and was filled with regret that he didn't call out to the driver of the taxicab who was beginning to drive back down the driveway. "Stop!" Klaus would think to himself, even though it was too late to do anything about it. "Stop! Take this man away!" Of course, it is perfectly understandable that Klaus and his sisters were too surprised to act so quickly. But Klaus would lie awake in bed for years later. But Klaus would lie awake in bed years later, thinking that maybe, just maybe, if he had acted in time, he would have saved Uncle Monty's life. But he didn't. As the Boodler orphans stared at Count Olaf, the taxi drove back down the driveway, and the children were alone with their nemesis, a word which here means the worst enemy you could imagine. Olaf smiled at them the way Uncle Monty's Mongolian mean snake would smile when a white mouse was placed in its cage each day for dinner. Can you guys see that? Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here. Hold on. That might be a little bit better. Perhaps one of you might carry my suitcase into my room, he suggested in his wheezy voice. The ride along that smelly road was dull and unpleasant, and I'm very tired. If anyone ever deserved to travel along lousy lane, Violet said, glaring at him, it is you, Count Olaf. We will certainly not help you with your luggage because we will not let you inside this house. We will not let you in this house. Olaf frowned at the orphans and then looked this way and that, as if he was expecting to see someone hiding behind the snake-shaped hedges. Who is Count Olaf? He asked quizzically. My name is Stefano. I'm here to assist Montgomery in his upcoming expedition to Peru. I assume you three are midgets who work as servants in the Montgomery home. We are not midgets, Klaus said sternly. We are children, and you are not Stefano. You are Count Olaf. You may have grown a beard and shaved your eyebrow, but you are still the same despicable person, and we will not let you in this house. Futa! Sonny shrieked, which probably meant something like, I agree. Count Olaf looked at each of the Boodler orphans, his eyes shining brightly as if we were telling a joke. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but if I did, and I were this Count Olaf you speak of, I would think that you were being very rude. And if I thought you were rude, I might get angry. And if I got angry, who knows what I would do? The children watched as Count Olaf raised his scrawny arms in a sort of shrug. It probably isn't necessary to remind you just how violent he could be. But it certainly wasn't necessary at all to remind the Boodlers. Klaus could still feel the bruise on his face from the time Count Olaf had struck him when they were living in his house. Sonny still ached from being stuffed into a bird cage and dangled from the tower where he had made his evil plans. And while Violet had not been the victim of any physical violence from this terrible man, she had almost been forced to marry him. And that was enough to make her pick up his suitcase and drag it slowly toward the door to the house. Higher, Olaf said. Lift it higher. I don't want it to drag along the ground like that. Klaus and Sonny hurried up to help Violet with the suitcase, but even with the three of them carrying it, the weight made them stagger. It was misery enough that Count Olaf had reappeared in their lives just when they were feeling so comfortable and safe with Uncle Monty. But to actually be helping this awful person enter their home was almost more than they could bear. Olaf followed closely behind, and the three children could smell his stale breath as they brought the suitcase indoors and set it on the carpet beneath the painting of the entwined snakes. Thank you, orphans, Olaf said, shutting the front door behind him. Now, Dr. Montgomery said my room would be waiting for me upstairs. Oh my gosh. I suppose I can carry my luggage from here. Now run along. We'll have lots of time to get to know one another. We already know you, Count Olaf, Violet said. You obviously haven't changed a bit. You haven't changed either, Olaf said. It is clear to me, Violet, that you are as stubborn as ever. And Klaus, you are still wearing those idiotic glasses from reading too many books. And I see that little Sonny here still has 9 toes instead of 10. Foot, Sonny shrieked, which probably meant something like, I do not. What are you talking about? Klaus said impatiently. She has 10 toes just like everybody else. Really? Olaf said. That's odd. I remember that she lost one of her toes in an accident. His eyes shone even brighter, as if he were telling a joke, and he reached into the pocket of his shabby coat and brought out a long knife, such as one might use for slicing bread. I seem to recall there was a man who was so confused by being called repeatedly by the wrong name that he accidentally dropped a knife on her little foot and severed one of her toes. Violet and Klaus looked at Count Olaf, and then at the bare foot on their little sister. You wouldn't dare, Klaus said. Let's not discuss what I would or would not dare to do, Olaf said. Let's discuss, rather, what I am to be called for as long as we are together in this house. We'll call you Stefano if you insist on threatening us, Violet said, but we won't be together in this house for long. Stefano opened his mouth to say something, but Violet was not interested in continuing the conversation. She turned on her heel and marched primly through the enormous door of the reptile room, followed by her siblings. If you or I had been there, we would have thought that the Boodler orphans weren't scared at all, speaking so bravely like that to Stefano, and then simply walking away. But once the children reached the far end of the room, their true emotion showed clearly on their faces. The Boodlers were terrified. Violet put her hands over her face and leaned against one of the reptile cages. Klaus sank into a chair, trembling so hard that his feet rattled against the marble floor. And Sunny curled up into a little ball on the floor, so tiny you might have missed her if you walked into the room. For several moments, none of the children spoke, just listened to the muffled sounds of Stefano walking up the stairs and their own heartbeats pounding in their ears. How did he find us? Klaus asked. His voice was a hoarse whisper, as if he had a sore throat. How did he get to be Uncle Monty's assistant? What is he doing here? He vowed that he'd get his hands on the Boodler fortune, Violet said, taking her hands away from her face and picking up Sunny, who was shivering. That was the last thing he said to me before he escaped. He said he'd get our fortune if it was the last thing he ever did. Violet shuddered and did not add that he'd also said that once he got their fortune, he'd do away with all three of the Boodler siblings. She did not need to add that. Violet, Klaus, and Sunny all knew that if he figured out a way to seize their fortune, he would slit the throats of the Boodler orphans as easily as you or I might eat a small butter cookie. What can we do? Klaus asked. Uncle Monty won't be back for hours. Maybe we can call Mr. Poe, Violet said. It's the middle of business hours. But maybe he could leave the bank for an emergency. He wouldn't believe us, Klaus said. Remember when we tried to tell him about Count Olaf when we lived there? He took such a long time to realize the truth. It was almost too late. I think we should run away. If we leave right now, we could probably get to town in time to catch a train far away from here. Violet pictured the three of them all alone, walking along Lousy Lane beneath the sour apple trees and the bitter smell of horseradish encircling them. Where would we go? She asked. Anywhere, Klaus said. Anywhere but here. We could go far away from where Count Olaf wouldn't find us, and change our name so no one would know who we are. We haven't any money, Violet pointed out. How could we live by ourselves? We could get jobs, Klaus replied. I could work in a library maybe, and you could work in some sort of mechanical factory. Sunny probably couldn't get a job at her age, but in a few years she could. The three orphans were quiet. They tried to picture leaving Uncle Monty and living by themselves, trying to find jobs and take care of each other. It was a very lonely prospect. The Boodlers sat in sad silence for a while, and they were each thinking the same thing. They wished that their parents had never been killed in the fire, and that their lives had never been turned topsy-turvy the way that they had. If only the Boodler parents were still alive, the youngsters wouldn't even have heard of Count Olaf, let alone have him settling into their home and undoubtedly making evil plans. We can't leave, Violet said finally. Count Olaf found us once, and I'm sure he'll find us again no matter how far we went. Plus, who knows where Count Olaf's assistants are? Perhaps they've surrounded the house right now, keeping watch in case we're on to him. Klaus shivered. He hadn't been thinking of Olaf's assistants. Besides, scheming to get his hands on the Boodler fortune, Olaf was the leader of a terrible theater troupe, and his fellow actors were always ready to help him with his plans. They were a gruesome crew, each more terrifying than the next. There was a bald man with a long nose who always wore a black robe. There were two women, always had ghostly white powder on their faces. There was a person so large and blank-looking that you couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. And there was a skinny man with two hooks where his hand should have been. Violet was right. Any of these people could be lurking outside Uncle Monty's house, waiting to catch them if they tried to escape. I think we should just wait for Uncle Monty to come back and tell him what has happened, Violet said. He'll believe us if we tell him about the tattoo. He'll at least ask Stefano for an explanation. Violet's tone of voice when she said Stefano indicated her utter scorn for Olaf's disguise. Are you sure? Klaus asked. After all, Uncle Monty is the one who hired Stefano. Klaus's tone of voice when he said Stefano indicated that he shared his sister's feelings. For all we know, Uncle Monty and Stefano have planned something together. Minda! Sunny shrieked, which probably meant something like, Don't be ridiculous, Klaus. Violet shook her head. Sunny's right. I can't believe that Uncle Monty would be in cahoots with Olaf. He's been so kind and generous to us, and besides, if they were working together, Olaf wouldn't insist on using a different name. That's true, Klaus said thoughtfully. So we wait for Uncle Monty. We wait, Violet agreed. Taju, Sunny said solemnly, and the siblings looked at one another glumly. Waiting is one of life's hardships. It is hard enough to wait for chocolate cream pie while burnt roast beef is still on your plate. It is plenty difficult to wait for Halloween when the tedious month of September is still ahead of you. But to wait for one's adopted uncle to come home while a greedy and violent man is upstairs was one of the worst waits the Baudelaires had ever experienced. To get their mind off it, they tried to continue with their work, but the children were too anxious to get anything done. Violet tried to fix a hinged door on one of the traps, but all she could concentrate on was the knot of worry in her stomach. Klaus tried to read about protecting oneself from thorny Peruvian plants, but thoughts of Stefano kept clouding his brain. And Sunny tried to bite rope, but she had a cold chill of fear running through her teeth, and she soon gave up. She didn't even feel like playing with the incredibly deadly viper. So the Baudelaires spent the rest of the afternoon sitting silently in the reptile room, looking out the window for Uncle Monty's Jeep and listening for the occasional noise from upstairs. They didn't even want to think about what Stefano might be unpacking. Finally, the snake-shaped hedges began to cast long, skinny shadows in the setting sun. The three children heard an approaching engine, and the Jeep pulled up. A large canoe was strapped to the roof of the Jeep, and the back seat was piled with Monty's purchases. Uncle Monty got out, struggling under the weight of several shopping bags, and saw the children through the glass walls of the reptile room. He smiled at them. They smiled back, and in an instant, when they smiled, was created another moment of regret for them. Had they not paused to smile at Monty, but instead gone dashing out the car, they might have had a brief moment alone with him. But by the time they reached the entry hall, he was already talking to Stefano. I didn't know what kind of toothbrush you preferred, Uncle Monty was saying apologetically, so I got you one with extra firm bristles, because that's the kind I like. Peruvian food tends to be sticky, so you need to have at least one extra toothbrush whenever you go there. Extra firm bristles are fine with me, Stefano said, speaking to Uncle Monty, but looking at the orphans with his shiny, shiny eyes. Shall I carry in the canoe? Yes, but my goodness, you can't carry it all by yourself, Uncle Monty said. Klaus, please help Stefano, will you? Uncle Monty, Violet said, we have something very important to tell you. I'm all ears, Uncle Monty said, but first let me show you the wasp repellent I picked up. I'm so glad Klaus read up on the insect situation in Peru, because the other repellents I have would have been no use at all. Uncle Monty rooted through one of the bags on his arm as the children waited impatiently for him to finish. This one contains a chemical called Uncle Monty, Klaus said. What we have to tell you really can't wait. Klaus, Uncle Monty said, his eyebrows rising in surprise. It's not polite to interrupt when your uncle is talking. Now please help Stefano with the canoe, and we'll talk about anything you want in a few moments. Klaus sighed but followed Stefano out the open door. Violet watched them walking toward the Jeep as Uncle Monty put down the shopping bags and faced her. I can't remember what I was saying about the repellent, he said, a little crossly. I hate losing my train of thought. What we have to tell you, Violet began, but she stopped when something caught her eye. Monty was facing away from the door, so he couldn't see what Stefano was doing, but Violet saw Stefano stop at the snake-shaped hedges, reach into his coat pocket, and take out the knife. Its blade caught the light of the setting sun, and it glowed brightly like a lighthouse. You probably know lighthouses serve as a warning signal, telling ships where the shore is so they don't run into it. The shining knife was a warning too. Klaus looked at the knife, and then at Stefano, and then at Violet. Violet looked at Klaus, and then at Stefano, and then at Monty. Sonny looked at everyone, only Monty didn't notice what was going on. So intent was he on remembering whatever he was babbling about was about wasp repellent. "Well, we have to tell you," Violet began again, but she couldn't continue. Stefano didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Violet knew that if she breathed one word about his true identity, Stefano would hurt her brother right there at the snake-shaped hedges. Without saying a word, the nemesis of the Boudelaire orphans had sent a very clear warning. Chapter 5. That night felt like the longest and most terrible the Boudelaire orphans had ever had, and they'd had plenty. There was one night, shortly after Sonny was born, that all three children had a horrible flu, and tossed and turned in the grasp of a terrible fever. While their father tried to soothe them all at once, placing cold washcloths on their sweaty brows, the night after their parents had been killed, the three children had stayed at Mr. Poe's house and stayed up all night, too miserable and confused to even try to sleep. And of course, they had spent many a long, terrible night while living with Count Olaf. But this particular night seemed worse. From the moment of Monty's arrival until bedtime, Stefano kept the children under his constant surveillance, a phrase which here means kept watching them so they couldn't possibly talk to Uncle Monty alone and reveal that he was really Count Olaf. And Uncle Monty was so preoccupied to think that anything unusual was going on. When they brought in the rest of Uncle Monty's purchases, Stefano carried bags with only one hand, keeping the other one in his coat pocket where the long knife was hidden. But Uncle Monty was too excited about all the new supplies to ask about it. When they went into the kitchen to prepare dinner, Stefano smiled menacingly at the children as he sliced mushrooms, but Uncle Monty was too busy making sure the stroganoff sauce didn't boil to even notice that Stefano was using his own threatening knife for the chopping. Over dinner, Stefano told funny stories and praised Monty's scientific work. And Uncle Monty was so flattered he didn't even think to guess that Stefano was holding a knife under the table, rubbing the blade gently against Violet's knee for the entire meal. And when Uncle Monty announced that he would spend the evening showing his new assistant around the reptile room, he was too eager to realize that the Baudelaires simply went up to bed without a word. For the first time, having individual bedrooms seemed like a hardship rather than a luxury. For without one another's company, the orphans felt even more lonely and helpless. Violet stared at the paper tacked to her wall and tried to imagine what Stefano was planning. Klaus sat in his large cushioned chair and turned on his brass reading lamp, but was too worried to even open a book. Sonny stared at her hard objects but didn't bite a single one of them. All three children thought of walking down the hall to Uncle Monty's room and waking him up to tell him what was wrong. But to get to his bedroom, they would have to walk past the room in which Stefano was staying, and all night long Stefano kept watch in a chair placed in front of his open door. When the orphans opened their doors to peer down the dark hallway, they saw Stefano's pale, shaved head, which seemed to be floating above his body in the darkness, and they could see his knife, which Stefano was moving slowly like a pendulum of a grandfather clock. Back and forth it went, back and forth, glinting in the dim light, and the sight was so fearsome they didn't dare try walking down the hallway. Finally, the light in the house turned the pale blue-gray of early dawn, and the Baudelaire children walked blearily down the stairs to breakfast. Tired and achy from their sleepless night, they sat around the table where they had eaten cake on their first morning at the house, and picked listlessly at their food, for the first time since their arrival at Uncle Monty's. They were not eager to enter the reptile room and begin the day's work. "I suppose we have to go in now," Violet said, finally putting aside her scarcely nibbled toast. "I'm sure Uncle Monty has already started working and is expecting us. And I'm sure that Stefano is there too," Klaus said, staring glumly into his cereal bowl. "We'll never get a chance to tell Uncle Monty what we know about him." "Yinga," Sunny said sadly, dropping her untouched raw carrot on the floor. "If only Uncle Monty knew what we know," Violet said. "And Stefano knew that he knew what we know, but Uncle Monty doesn't know what we know, and Stefano knows what he doesn't know what we know." "I know," Klaus said. "I know you know," Violet said. "But what we don't know is what Count Olaf, Stefano, is really up to. He's after our fortune, certainly, but how can he get it if we're under Uncle Monty's care? Maybe he is just going to wait until you're of age and then steal the fortune," Klaus said. 4 years is a long time to wait," Violet said. The 3 orphans were quiet, as each remembered where they had been 4 years ago. Violet had been 10 and had worn her hair very short. She remembered that sometime around her 10th birthday she had invented a new kind of pencil sharpener. Klaus had been about 8, and he remembered how interested he had been in comets, reading all the astronomy books his parents had in their library. Sunny, of course, had not been born 4 years ago, and she sat and tried to remember what that was like. Very dark, she thought, with nothing to bite. For all 3 youngsters, 4 years did seem like a very long time ago. Come on. You're moving very slowly this morning," Uncle Monty said, bursting into the room. His face seemed even brighter than usual, and he was holding a small bunch of folded papers in one hand. "Stefano has only worked here 1 day, and he's already in the reptile room. In fact, he was up before I was. I ran into him on my way down the stairs. He's an eager beaver, but you 3, you're moving like the Hungarian sloth snake, whose top speed is half an inch per hour. We have lots to do today, and I'd like to catch the 6 o'clock showing of Zombies in the Snow tonight. So let's try to hurry. Violet looked at Monty and realized that this might be their opportunity to talk to him alone, without Stefano around. But he seemed so wound up they weren't sure if he would listen to them. "Speaking of Stefano," she said timidly, "we'd like to talk to you about him." Uncle Monty's eyes widened, and he looked around as if there were spies in the room before leaning in to whisper to the children. "I'd like to talk to you too," he said. "I have my suspicions about Stefano, and I'd like to discuss them with you." The Boodler orphans looked at one another in relief. "You do?" Klaus said. "Of course," Uncle Monty said. "Last night I began to get very suspicious about this new assistant of mine. There's something a little spooky about him, and Uncle Monty looked around and began speaking even softer, so the children had to hold their breaths to hear him. "And I think we should discuss it outside, shall we?" The children nodded in agreement and rose from the table, leaving their dirty breakfast dishes behind, which is not a good thing to do in general, but perfectly acceptable in the face of an emergency. They walked with Uncle Monty to the front entryway, past the painting of 2 snakes entwined together, out the front door, and onto the lawn, as if they wanted to talk to the snake-shaped hedges instead of to one another. "I didn't mean to be vainglorious," Uncle Monty began, using a word which here means braggy, "but I really am one of the most widely respected herpetologists in the world." Klaus blinked. It was an unexpected beginning for the conversation. "Of course you are," he said, and because of this, I'm sad to say," Uncle Monty continued, as if he had not heard, "many people are jealous of me." "I'm sure that's true," Violet said, puzzled. "And when people are jealous," Uncle Monty said, shaking his head, "they will do anything. They will do crazy things. When I was getting my herpetology degree, my roommate was so envious of a new toad I had discovered that he stole and ate my only specimen. I had to x-ray his stomach and use the x-rays rather than the toad in my presentation. And something tells me we may have a similar situation here." What was Uncle Monty talking about? "I'm afraid I don't quite follow you," Klaus said, which is a polite way of saying, "What are you talking about, Uncle Monty?" "Last night after you went to bed, Stefano asked me a few too many questions about all the snakes and about my upcoming expedition. And do you know why? I think so, Violet began, but Uncle Monty interrupted her. It's because this man, who is calling himself Stefano, he said is really a member of the Herpetology Society, and he's here to try to find the incredibly deadly viper, so he can preempt my presentation. Do you three know what the word preempt means? No, Violet said, but it means I think this Stefano is going to steal my snake, Uncle Monty said, and present it to the Herpetological Society, because it is a new species. There's no way I can prove I discovered it. Before we know it, the incredibly deadly viper will be called the Stefano snake. Or something dreadful like that. And if he's planning that, just think about what he will do to our Peruvian expedition. Each toad we catch, each venom sample we put into a test tube, each snake interview we record, every scrap of work we do will fall into the hands of this Herpetological Society spy. He's not a Herpetological Society spy, Klaus said impatiently. He's Count Olaf. I know, just what you mean, Uncle Monty said excitedly. This sort of behavior is indeed as dastardly as that terrible man's. That is why I'm doing this. He raised one hand and waved the folded papers in the air. As you know, he said, tomorrow we are leaving for Peru. These are our tickets for the 5 o'clock voyage on the Prospero, a fine ship that will take us across the sea to South America. There is a ticket for me, one for Violet, one for Klaus, and one for Stefano. But not one for Sunny, because we're going to hide her in a suitcase to save money. Depot. I'm kidding about that, but I'm not kidding about this, Uncle Monty said, face flushed with excitement, took one of the folded papers and began ripping it into tiny pieces. This is Stefano's ticket. He's not going to Peru with us after all. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to tell him that he needs to stay here and look after my specimens instead. That way we can run a successful expedition in peace. But Uncle Monty, Klaus said, how many times must I remind you it's not polite to interrupt? Uncle Monty interrupted, shaking his head. In any case, I know what you're worried about. You're worried what will happen if he stays here alone with the incredibly deadly viper. But don't worry, the viper will join us on the expedition, traveling in one of our snake-carrying cases. I don't know why you're looking so glum, Sonny. I thought you'd be happy to have the viper's company. So don't look so worried, Bambini. As you can see, your Uncle Monty has a situation in hand. When somebody is a little bit wrong, say when a waiter puts non-fat milk in your espresso macchiato instead of low-fat milk, it is often quite easy to explain to them how and why they are wrong. But if somebody is surpassingly wrong, say when a waiter bites your nose instead of taking your order, you can often be so surprised you are unable to say anything at all. Paralyzed by how wrong the waiter is, your mouth would hang slightly open and your eyes would blink over and over, but you would be unable to say a word. That is what the Baudelaire children did. Uncle Monty was so wrong about Stefano in thinking he was a herpetological spy rather than Count Olaf that the three siblings could scarcely think of a way to tell him. Come now, my dears, Uncle Monty said. We've wasted enough of the morning on talk. We have to— Ow! He interrupted himself with a cry of surprise and pain and fell to the ground. Uncle Monty, Klaus cried. The Baudelaire children saw that a large shiny object was on top of him and realized a moment later what the object was. It was the heavy brass reading lamp, the one standing next to the large cushioned chair in Klaus's room. Ow! Uncle Monty said again, pulling the lamp off him. That really hurt. My shoulder may be sprained. It's a good thing it didn't land on my head, or it really could have done some damage. Where did it come from? Violet asked. It must have fallen from the window, Uncle Monty said, pointing up to where Klaus's room was. Whose room is that? Klaus, I believe it is yours. You must be more careful. You can't dangle heavy objects out the window like that. Look what almost happened. But that lamp wasn't anywhere near my window, Klaus said. I keep it in the alcove, so I can read in that large chair. Really, Klaus? Uncle Monty said, standing up and handing him the lamp. Do you honestly expect me to believe that the lamp danced over the window and leaped onto my shoulder? Please put this back in your room in a safe place, and we'll say no more about it. But, Klaus said. His older sister interrupted him. I'll help you, Klaus, Violet said. We'll find a place for it where it's safe. Well, don't be too long, Uncle Monty said, rubbing his shoulder. We'll see you in the reptile room. Come, Sonny. Walking through the entry hall, the four parted ways at the stairs, with Uncle Monty and Sonny going to the enormous door of the reptile room, and Violet and Klaus carrying the heavy brass lamp up to Klaus's room. You know very well, Klaus hissed to his sister, that I was not careless with this lamp. Of course I know that, Violet whispered, but there is no use trying to explain that to Uncle Monty. He thinks Stefano is a herpetological spy. You know as well as I do that Stefano was responsible for this. How clever of you to figure that out, said a voice at the top of the stairs, and Violet and Klaus were so surprised that they almost dropped the lamp. It was Stefano, or, if you prefer, it was Count Olaf. It was the bad guy, but then you've always been clever, children, he continued, a little too clever for my taste. But you won't be around for long, so I'm not troubled by it. You're not very clever yourself, Klaus said fiercely. This heavy brass lamp almost hit us, but if anything happens to my sisters or me, you'll never get your hands on the Boudelier fortune. Dear me, Stefano said, his grimly teeth showing as he smiled. If I wanted to harm you, orphan, your blood would already be pouring down these stairs like a waterfall. No, I'm not going to harm any hair. I'm not going to harm a hair on any Baudelaire head. Not here in this house. You needn't be afraid of me, little ones, until we find ourselves in a location where crimes are more difficult to trace. And where would that be? Violet asked. We plan to stay right here until we grow up. Really? Stefano said, in that sneaky voice. Why? I had the impression we were leaving the country tomorrow. Uncle Monty tore up your ticket, Klaus said triumphantly. He was suspicious of you, so he changed his plans, and now you're not going with us. Stefano's smile turned into a scowl, and his stained teeth seemed to grow bigger. His eyes grew so shiny that it hurt Violet and Klaus to look at them. I wouldn't rely on that, he said in a terrible voice. Even the best plans can change if there's an accident. He pointed one spiky finger at the brass reading lamp. And accidents happen all the time. Alrighty, that's where I'm going to end it here. I'm hoping everybody is enjoying the book so far. If so, please feel free to like and subscribe to the channel. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye!